At 10:57 on January 30th, 1943, three strange returns appear on the plot in Berlin's air defense bunker beneath Wilhelmstrasse. The man reading them is no tired substitute. Hauptmann Karl Reinhardt is 41, awake for 19 hours, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, and a graduate of the Luftwaffe War Academy. For the last 2 years, he has read radar plots over Germany, and he has done this work thousands of times. Lancaster, Halifax, B-17 Flying Fortress. He knows each bomber profile by memory. He knows their speed, their cruising height, and the approaches that leave them exposed. When an enemy aircraft enters German airspace, Reinhardt sends fighters up and guides them onto the target. At 10:57, 3 plots hit his board. Too fast. They came from the northwest, and the track looked wrong. He asked for altitude, 25,000 feet. He asked for speed, 400 miles per hour. No Allied bomber fit that profile. No aircraft on Earth did. Controllers checked again. Every second went into the data. The plots stayed fast. He scrambled a squadron of Messerschmitt 109s from Uetersen. The fighters climbed, strained, and reached 25,000 feet as the plots crossed the city center. At exactly 11, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring stepped to the microphone in the Air Ministry building above Reinhardt's head. He began the 10th anniversary broadcast marking the National Socialist seizure of power. 4 sentences came out. Then the bombs landed. No drama. The timing did the damage. The raid cut into a live broadcast, and the public record turned into an immediate failure. Reinhardt's after-action report stayed technical, almost restrained. It said the contacts were too fast for his fighters to engage, and it said his radar, his procedures, or his men had to be at fault. He listed 3 explanations: a false echo from the Freya transmitter, a coordinated jamming effort, a plot officer who misread the altitude. Berlin had just been bombed in the middle of the broadcast. That mattered. It meant the report had to explain why the intercept never came in time. It also meant Reinhardt never wrote the one sentence that matched the data exactly. The British had an aircraft they could not catch. That left a stranger fact. Berlin had been struck by a wooden bomber. Built from balsa wood and birch plywood and assembled by furniture makers in a small English town, it was faster than every fighter the Luftwaffe put in the sky. German engineers still could not catch it. Its name was the de Havilland Mosquito. That speed broke more than an interception plan. On a screen in 1943, the mark looked wrong because German pilots and engineers had spent decades learning that a modern combat aircraft had to be metal. It looked false. The answer sat far behind the war, in a Dessau workshop where Hugo Junkers built the Junkers J1 in 1915. Its skin was corrugated duralumin under straight rows of rivets, and the machine used no fabric and no wood. Metal became habit. The German Aviation Research Center drew on long metallurgical work, and by 1937, German universities graduated more aeronautical engineers than the rest of Europe combined. By the late 1930s, the Bf-109, Fw-190, He-111, and Ju-88 all followed the same all-metal stressed skin pattern across the operational Luftwaffe fleet. That metal habit reached British desks too. In July 1938, Geoffrey de Havilland Sr. wrote Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman at the Air Ministry. His point was plain. He counted materials and labor, not style. War would squeeze aluminum, strategic materials would be rationed, and conscription could pull skilled metalworkers out of the shops. Wood remained available. So did other hands. Furniture factories, coach builders, and boatyards could shift to aircraft orders within weeks. Britain would not need to wait on aluminum plants alone. The ministry read the letter, rejected it again in October 1938, and rejected it once more in 1939. Across the Channel, German classrooms had already narrowed the answer. In Stuttgart, Braunschweig, and Berlin-Charlottenburg, Future engineers learned that load-bearing metal skin was the only serious path for combat airframes. Students wrote papers on stringer spacing, rivet load distribution, and the heat treatment cycles of duralumin sheet, not on plywood. Chalk dust sat on the board, rivet lines gleamed in teaching diagrams. Teachers pushed plywood toward boat builders, not toward fighter design. High speed, they argued, depended on the best strength-to-weight ratio. That led straight to aluminum alloy stressed skin semi-monocoque construction. Old wood and fabric biplanes carried a sneer. Germans called that world crate driving, and the phrase dismissed more than a machine. It pushed one whole material family outside serious aviation before a new war had fully tested it. Wood already lost. That conclusion did rest on real data. Metal skin had delivered speed, strength, and the clean numbers engineers trusted. But the clock had moved. In that professional culture, headquarters received wood as a weak idea before anyone saw it fly. By the late 1930s, a wooden combat aircraft already looked obsolete before its first flight. That bias moved from classrooms into ministry paperwork. At one rejection meeting, the chair judged the concept unlikely to survive contact with the enemy. The file said no. And the reason sat inside the P-13/36 specification: a heavy bomber, 4 engines, several defensive turrets, and a crew of 7. De Havilland offered the reverse: no guns, no turrets, just 2 men inside a wooden airframe. Against that requirement sheet, the project looked weak before it had any chance to prove what speed could do in the air. So this was never just one British meeting. In 1939, London and the Luftwaffe read the same silhouette the same way: too light, too exposed, too far from serious bomber thinking. Both sides expected armor, gunners, and mass. 4 years later, 3 Mosquitoes crossed Hauptmann Reinhardt's radar plot. That radar return began in a cut section, not armor plate. The fuselage used a sandwich build. 2 birch plywood skins sat outside, each just over 1.5 millimeters thick. About 13 millimeters of Ecuadorian balsa sat between them. Workers bonded the layers with synthetic resin glue. They formed the body on a concrete mold in 2 half shells. Then they joined both halves into an oval tube wide enough for 2 men to lift. The wing followed the same rule of weight first. Sitka spruce and Douglas fir carried a plywood skin over a single spar. The control surfaces stayed fabric over wooden frames. The canopy used perspex. Weight kept falling at every stage. That let de Havilland bolt on 2 Rolls-Royce Merlins, the same engines used by Britain's main fighters. The layout ended in one hard equation: 2 engines, 2 men, no defensive guns. Papers settled nothing at all. In autumn 1940, workers assembled prototype W4050 in a small farm building beside Salisbury Hall, north of London. Hatfield came next that afternoon. At 15:45 on November 25th, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. took the aircraft up, flew for 30 minutes, and reported only slight tail buffet. The fix came quickly after. 3 months later, Boscombe Down measured the machine in formal trials, and its report logged 631 kilometers per hour at about 6,700 meters with single-stage Merlins. Benchmarks shifted at once. That figure already beat the fastest Spitfire in service that month, which reached 579 kilometers per hour. The wooden airframe was already ahead. In 1943, Mosquito night fighter MP469 raised the mark to 657 kilometers per hour. The test came at about 8,470 meters. Its 2-stage Merlins kept their power high above the old trial band. The fastest German fighter in service that year, the Messerschmitt 109 G6, managed 621 kilometers per hour. Attack margin vanished. A British wooden aircraft now outran a German single-seat interceptor by about 35 kilometers per hour. Losses told the story. Over Berlin, German defenses could not catch the Mosquito, and crews flew deep into German airspace by day without escort. No escort needed. In bomber command operations across every role, losses stayed below 1% per sortie. Lancaster lost 2.13%, Halifax 2.6%, and Stirling 3.8%. So the aircraft the Air Ministry had doubted in combat became the safest combat aircraft in the Royal Air Force. It also took many jobs. The same airframe became a fighter-bomber, high-altitude pathfinder, night raider, maritime strike aircraft, photo-reconnaissance machine, and a precision attacker that could wreck a Gestapo headquarters from about 30 meters up. Then scale followed. 37 production variants and 7,781 aircraft came out of Britain, Downsview near Toronto, and Bankstown for 12 air forces. Production totals show reach. One night shows the man inside them. On the 4th of November, 1944, Wing Commander Bransom Burbage taxied out at Swannington. He flew with No. 85 Squadron, Royal Air Force, in a Mosquito night fighter with a black runway ahead. Earlier in the war, he had registered as a conscientious objector, then reversed that decision during the Blitz. That night brought one patrol. In a single sortie, he shot down one Messerschmitt Bf-110 and 3 Junkers Ju-88s. 4 aircraft in one flight. By war's end, his record stood at 21 confirmed night victories and 3 destroyed V-1s. That left him as the leading night fighter ace across the entire Allied war effort. After the war, he left the cockpit for the church. He became an evangelical Anglican preacher and never turned the tally into a boast. He said little about killing. When an interviewer finally pressed him after the war, Burbage gave one detail. He aimed for the wings, never the cockpit. He did not want to kill anyone. That restraint sat inside a wooden fighter, and the wood leads away from the runway. It leads to High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire, a furniture town of around 30,000 people. The air war ran through workshops. For 200 years, the town built chairs. Beech from the Chiltern Hills fed Windsor chair shops there from the 18th century. By the 1930s, High Wycombe was Britain's furniture capital. Firms such as E. Gom, Parker Knoll, Stiles and Mealing, Dancer and Hearn, and Frederick Parker and Sons filled the town. Those hands already knew how to bend, laminate, and finish hardwood to about 2.5 hundredths of a millimeter. So when Geoffrey de Havilland sent contracts there in 1941, the Mosquito did not need long retraining. The labor base was already there. Before those contracts went out, the aircraft had to be drawn. That happened at Salisbury Hall, a moated 17th century manor house about 16 kilometers north of London. Inside that manor, the gamble shrank to 8 men. In October 1939, de Havilland moved the team to Salisbury Hall. R.E. Bishop led them in the main hall, drawing on borrowed boards. Security came first. They hid the office because an easy address could kill the project. The first prototype stayed even lower. Workers assembled it in a small farm building beside the moat. A plain roof hid the shop under the shape of a farm shed, out of sight. Then came the stop order. In the summer of 1940, Lord Beaverbrook told the ministry to halt the Mosquito. He called it Freeman's folly. Sir Wilfrid Freeman did not pass the order to de Havilland, so the drawings lived. That one decision reached the factory floor. By 1943, former furniture workers were laminating Sitka spruce wing spars and turning out fuselage shells, rudders, ailerons, and tailplanes. Freeman kept Beaverbrook's order away from de Havilland, and the work continued. Because the stop order never arrived, the work spilled into the yards of High Wycombe. Roughly 5,000 of the 7,781 Mosquitoes carried parts from that town. Finished fuselages stood on trestles in the open before lorries took them away. The scale was visible. At Dancer and Hearn, crews laminated wing spars in heated presses, and steam lifted off the timber. A Stiles and Mealing Yard photograph shows one full fuselage beside women in headscarves filing timber to specification. These were furniture firms. They used beech and synthetic resin glue. The combat results started there, in work the town already knew. Yard-built sections and pressed spars gave the aircraft its speed at altitude. Then came the number. About 657 kilometers per hour at about 8.47 kilometers, and about 35 kilometers per hour faster than the fighter sent to catch it. That edge in the air began in private hands. Frank Whittle kept working after his regular job. Barnes Wallace spread his papers on a kitchen table in Effingham. The de Havilland family kept pushing its own aircraft project even when the Air Ministry showed little interest. From there, the jump was fast. A piano factory could not do this job, but a chair factory could. So could a coach builder's shop. So could a boatyard. In High Wycombe, woodcraft ran back to George III, and the same hands that had shaped Windsor chairs for generations could turn a drawing into aircraft parts without a long reset. Germany looked stronger on paper. It had Junkers, Krupp, Heinkel, Messerschmitt, and the laboratories of the Deutsche Versuchsanstalt für Luftfahrt. Its raw material position was no worse than Britain's until late 1943. But those firms and laboratories did not place the right habits inside small workshops, ready to shift from craft to airframes at once. Britain did. That was the difference. And on an aircraft built from that base, losses stayed below 1%. The combat record survived in numbers, but the hands behind it shrank to one quiet photograph in Wycombe. In the Wycombe Museum, women in headscarves stand beside a Mosquito fuselage in the Stiles and Mealing Yard, and most of their names are gone. Most names vanished. Yet their work came from a much larger trade that wartime Britain never threw away, while Germany had spent 30 years teaching that wood belonged to the past. Britain kept building in sheds and family firms across Hatfield, Bristol, and Coventry. The aircraft did not slow. Furniture makers, coach builders, and one stubborn family firm kept turning old shop skills into airframe work, and those skills stayed close to the drawing, the bench, and the finished bomber. The result remained after the labels faded. Aircraft touched by their hands went to Berlin 170 times. That break in the German pattern reached Berlin fast. 6 weeks after 3 Mosquitoes wrecked his 10th anniversary radio broadcast, Hermann Göring called every senior figure in German aviation to Carenhall. The estate stood in the Schorfheide, north of Berlin. One raid had reached the boardroom. Willy Messerschmitt arrived. Ernst Heinkel arrived too. Claudius Dornier and Field Marshal Erhard Milch joined them while stenographers took the minutes beside the sharp bursts of Göring's voice. Beyond the windows stood the forest. Dry keys kept up. That record survived on microfilm and now sits in the Imperial War Museum in London. Göring said the Mosquito made him mad with envy. Britain, he complained, could afford more aluminum than Germany, yet built a fast wooden aircraft and made it faster again. He added that furniture makers and piano factories over there were building them. Then he turned to Messerschmitt, and the transcript kept the order in plain words. Stop searching for an answer and build a copy of the Mosquito. 6 weeks after the humiliation, the most powerful man in German aviation was demanding a British copy that German factories could not supply. Göring was right on the central point. British Mosquitoes did come out of furniture works, and wood with glue moved faster through production than aluminum. He saw that much. He saw the old mistake. Germany could not reverse it. By 1943, it had no High Wycombe, no furniture trade ready for war work at that scale, and no long practice with fast wooden airframes built for sport flying. The woodworking skill that did survive sat at the edge of aircraft production because Junkers had pushed German design toward metal since 1918. By 1943, Germany had neither its own High Wycombe nor a furniture industry ready for that war. That gap soon narrowed to one object: plywood, Tego film, and glue that could not hold altitude. The Ta-154 reached the air, but later its wings came apart in flight. German plants were built for aluminum, and the glues on hand failed in local weather and at operating height. Wood aircraft lived or died at the glue line. Kurt Tank at Focke-Wulf still received the contract and named the copy the Ta-154. The first prototype flew on July 1, 1943. It looked promising. Tank used Tego, a phenolic adhesive film made by Goldschmidt in Wuppertal and set between plywood layers before assembly. Then Bomber Command hit the weak point. In May 1944, mosquitoes struck the Goldschmidt works and destroyed Tego output. Focke-Wulf received an acidic substitute. It ate into the plywood from inside. Wings failed in flight, test pilots died, and the Ta-154 program stopped in August 1944. The factory failure had its echo in the air. Adolf Galland later gave the same verdict in his memoir. Germany was almost powerless against the Mosquito. By day, the aircraft flew without losses and went wherever the mission demanded. By night, they drove people from their beds, and the grumbling landed on Göring. Göring answered with two special anti-mosquito wings, Jagdgeschwader 25 and Jagdgeschwader 50, flying high-altitude Messerschmitt 109s. Galland added one blunt line. As far as he knew, neither unit ever shot down a Mosquito. The answer in the sky matched the workshop. JG-25 and JG-50 produced not one Mosquito kill. While German crews still failed to stop the aircraft, one crew from 105 Squadron was already heading for Jena on a round trip of nearly 1,770 kilometers. Reggie Reynolds flew with navigator Edward Daisy Sizemore. Their target was the Carl Zeiss Optical Works in central Germany. Then the weather closed in. On the final leg, visibility fell below 800 meters, and Reynolds kept the Mosquito down at about 15 meters. The route was still live. This was the kind of daylight low-level reach German defenses would meet again, much closer to Berlin. A light anti-aircraft shell burst inside Reynolds' cockpit and wounded him. He kept flying. He brought the aircraft home. The London Gazette later fixed that sortie in print as one of the deepest daylight low-level penetrations of Germany in the war. As the Mosquito headed west, the Berlin bunker returned to one moment, 1100 hours on January 30th. The screen showed a target at about 7.6 kilometers and about 640 kilometers per hour, yet the officers called the plots false. No Allied aircraft, they insisted, could do both. They blamed mishandled intercepts and expected a reprimand. But the bombs had landed. Göring's microphone died mid-sentence for 63 minutes. The BBC in London carried the story before lunch. By then, the proof had moved from the airwaves to paper. In Freiburg, penciled margins on archive sheets show that Reinhardt was not one man. He was a stand-in for dozens of German night fighter controllers whose intercept reports recorded the same picture, the same conclusions, and the same dead end. They had no answer. Those pages turned one raid into a pattern. Geoffrey de Havilland Sr. kept pushing after the Air Ministry rejected his idea 3 times. In the summer of 1940, Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman ignored Lord Beaverbrook's order to kill the project, while R.E. Bishop drew the aircraft in a hall beside a moat. Those names matter. So did the crews and builders. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the chief test pilot, died in 1946 in the prototype of his father's next aircraft. Reggie Reynolds, Ted Sizemore, Brands Burbridge, Percy Pickard over Amiens, and the mostly nameless chairmakers of High Wycombe carried it to war, while Germany had Hugo Junkers and aluminum monocoque. In the Bundesarchiv at Freiburg, the intercept reports and penciled notes still survive. Once the raids exposed the result, the trail ran back to offices and workshops. Germany trusted the Reich Air Ministry, the largest aviation ministry in Europe, the Daimler-Benz 605, and calculations built around alloy strength against weight. Britain trusted a family firm, furniture makers, 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the workers in Derby, and Wilfred Freeman defying his own minister because he wanted a finished aircraft by Christmas, whatever covered its frame. It reached squadrons in time. It could still be shot down, and crews still died. Behind the argument over metal and wood were 2 graves in Berlin. Number 139 Squadron lost 2 men on the raid that opened this story. Squadron leader Donald Darling and flying officer William Wright died under flak near Altona Rubo on the daylight return leg. They lie side by side at the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery at Heerstrasse in Berlin. The same price appeared again at Amiens. On February 18, 1944, 24 crews went to the prison and 23 came back. The missing aircraft carried Group Captain Percy Pickard, holder of the Distinguished Service Order with 2 bars, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. A Focke-Wulf 190 from 7th Squadron, Fighter Wing 26, flown by Feldwebel Wilhelm Meyer, cut away his tail as the prison wall broke. Pickard's Mosquito spun into a field. He and navigator John Broadley were buried at St. Pierre Cemetery in Amiens. Once flak or a fighter reached the airframe, speed was over. Wood burned fast. The Mosquito still carried about 900 kilograms of bombs to Berlin and back, and later about 1,800, faster than any Luftwaffe interceptor. Even at that price, losses stayed below 1% per sortie. 2 men flew each mission, with no armor around them and no defensive guns behind them. Less weight bought speed, and speed kept Mosquito crews alive where heavy bombers paid in numbers. In the last 3 months of the war, 8 Group Pathfinders sent Mosquitoes to Berlin on 36 consecutive nights from the 20th of February 1945 to the 27th of March, and lost only a handful of crews. On a single night over Nuremberg in March 1944, the heavy force lost 95 Lancasters and Halifaxes. After the war, the Royal Air Force put the result in plain accounting. The Mosquito delivered almost 5 times the destruction of a Lancaster. Behind that cold post-war tally sits a quieter image. Chair makers from High Wycombe stare out from a photograph still hanging in the local museum. They built the aircraft by hand, out of wood, with the habits of furniture shops rather than heavy bomber yards. That is where the story lands. The same line ran through the workshops. Women in headscarves worked at Stiles and Mealing, while apprentices at Dancer and Hearn laminated spars in heated presses. Furniture makers and carpenters shaped a bomber with no armor and no defensive guns. Men at Bletchley read the German night fighter codes meant to catch it. The trap was there. The Mosquito still kept getting through. The decision came first. In 1938, Geoffrey de Havilland Sr. wrote from Hatfield to a minister who would not read him. Sir Wilfred Freeman did. He read the letter, kept the project alive, and backed a family firm against official doubt. Combat settled the rest. For 5 years, the Mosquito met the enemy and came home faster than anything sent up to stop it.